Our next alternative theory of recovery and enforcement is quasi-contract. Under a quasi-contract theory, even if we don't have a traditional enforceable contract, restitution may still be available to the plaintiff if the following three elements are met. Number one, the plaintiff conferred a measurable benefit to the defendant. Number two, the plaintiff conferred the benefit with the reasonable expectation of being compensated for its value. And number three, the defendant would be unjustly enriched if he were allowed to retain the benefit without compensating the plaintiff because either, number one, the defendant knew or had reason to know of the plaintiff's expectation of being compensated, or number two, the plaintiff had a reasonable excuse for conferring the benefit without the defendant's knowledge, which we're going to find is mostly emergency situations. But we're going to get into all of these elements, not to get ahead of myself, in all of these elements in a lot of detail, right? But before we jump into the elements, there is one important thing to note off the top, right? When we're talking about a quasi-contract theory, it's important to note that the plaintiff is going to be limited purely to restitutionary recovery, right? We do not treat a quasi-contract like we would treat a breach of a traditional enforceable contract, where the plaintiff would then be able to recover expectation damages, reliance damages, right? When we're talking about quasi-contract, if these three elements are met, if the plaintiff can show these three elements under a quasi-contract theory, he's going to be limited to restitutionary recovery, which is going to be the monetary value, the economic value of whatever was the benefit that he conferred to the other side. So whatever that benefit was, whatever the economic value of that benefit is, right? Whatever that fair market value price is or that economic value is, that's what his restitutionary recovery is going to be limited to. Not what he expected to get out of the deal, not what his losses incurred in reliance on the deal were. He's going to be purely limited to this first element, right? Whatever the value of the benefit he conferred to the other side, whatever that value is, that's all he's going to be entitled to in damages under quasi-contract, right? So important to make this note because at the end of this video, we're going to talk about something similar to quasi-contracts, which are implied in fact contracts, and there we'll see that remedies are a little bit different, right? So it's important to make this distinction from the beginning when we're talking about quasi-contract or implied in law contracts. The plaintiff is limited purely to restitutionary recovery, okay? But enough with that. If we know off the top that the plaintiff is going to be limited to restitution under a quasi-contract theory, we're ready to move on to these three elements, right? So restitution may be available to the plaintiff if, number one, the plaintiff conferred a measurable benefit to the defendant, right? This is pretty easy, right? There's no real tricks here. All that we have to make sure is really that a real good or service or property expenditure is being conferred, right? It can't be something that's not measurable, something like compassion or companionship. You can't argue under a quasi-contract theory because I was this person's best friend for this many years, and I offered companionship. No, we're talking here under this first element of things that have real measurable value, right? A benefit that is either usually going to be a good or a service rendered, right? This first element's usually pretty easy to see though. Plaintiff is conferring a measurable benefit to the defendant. Number two, the plaintiff conferred the benefit with the reasonable expectation of being compensated for its value. The second element is all about gratuitous intent, right? You can't recover under a quasi-contract theory if you conferred a benefit to somebody else with gratuitous intent, right? Imagine around the holiday season and birthdays, right, it'd be chaos. We would have all kinds of quasi-contract theories popping up because every time somebody gave somebody a gift, right, out of the kindness of their heart, and then they changed their mind about that person a couple weeks later, they would be able to recover under a quasi-contract theory for the value of that gift being conferred. right? So the problem and the reason that somebody can't do that, right? If you give somebody a birthday gift and then you change your mind 2 weeks later and say, you know what, I actually don't like this person anymore. I'd like to recover the economic value of that benefit I conferred, of that gift I conferred to this party. You're going to run into a problem with this second element, right? Did the plaintiff confer the benefit with the reasonable expectation of being compensated for its value, right? If you're giving somebody a gift, by definition, you're not expecting to be compensated for its value. Therefore, you can't satisfy the second element. You can't satisfy a quasi-contract theory, right? So this is all about gratuitous intent. We're not going to let plaintiffs recover under quasi-contract for giving people gifts with gratuitous intent or for conferring benefits with gratuitous intent, right? So our third element, right, once we've established 1 and 2, okay, they'll say that the plaintiff isn't conferring the benefit with gratuitous intent. They're actually conferring a benefit with a reasonable expectation of being compensated for its value, right? So 1 element, 2 element, our first 2 elements are satisfied. Our third element is all about officious intermeddlers, right, in emergency situations. So our third element is if the plaintiff conferred a measurable benefit to the defendant and the plaintiff conferred the benefit with the reasonable expectation of being compensated for its value, the third element is going to be and the defendant would be unjustly enriched if he were allowed to retain the benefit without compensating the plaintiff because either the defendant knew or had reason to know of the plaintiff's expectation, or B, the plaintiff had a reasonable excuse for conferring the benefit without the defendant's knowledge. So this third element is all about unjust enrichment. Remember, our theme with our alternative theories is this idea of equity and fairness and justice, right? So under quasi-contract, the whole idea here is unjust enrichment. If you confer a measurable benefit to the other side, right, and you had a reasonable expectation of being paid, that's not enough to recover under a quasi-contract theory. You also have to show that the other side would be unjustly enriched by being allowed to retain that benefit without compensating you, right? You have to show basically that the situation is unfair, right? It'd be unfair to let this other party keep that benefit without paying you. And how do you do that? Well, there's 2 main ways under a quasi-contract theory. And really what we want to look out for and what's a commonly tested fact pattern is this idea of the officious intermeddler. Let's say, and this is a classic fact pattern, that you have a painter, right? A painter is scouting the neighborhood for houses that need a paint job, right? The outside of the house needs a paint job. So he's going around the neighborhood and he finds your house and he says, wow, this house is really ugly. It needs a new paint job. I know what to do. I'll go while this owner is away, they're not home. I'm gonna surprise them and paint this house, right? A brand new shade of my most expensive paint, and it's going to look beautiful, right? So the painter does this, you're not home, and the painter has a full expectation of being compensated for the services rendered of painting your house, right? So the painter paints your house for you. Of course, you come back and the painter says, hey, look, I made your house look so great. Look at this new paint job. And you're like, oh, wow, thank you. It does look great. And he's like, yeah, so that'll be $1,000 for this benefit I've conferred to you. Of course, you refuse to pay him. And the question is, can he recover under a quasi-contract theory? Obviously, we know he can't recover under a traditional enforceable contract because there's no mutual assent, right? We have no meeting of the minds here. There's no offer and acceptance. He just showed up. There was never an offer. He just shows up and paints your house. So we know no meeting of the minds, can't have a traditional enforceable contract, but this painter knows, hey, you know, there's this quasi-contract theory, and I've conferred this benefit, and I had a reasonable expectation of being compensated for the value of conferring this benefit. So I satisfy element 1 and 2. Where this painter is going to run into problems is this third element, right? The defendant, you here, right, the homeowner is not going to be unjustly enriched because the homeowner here did not know or have any reason to know that the plaintiff, the painter, expected to be paid, right? This homeowner didn't even know that the painter existed. He just showed up and his house was a new shade of paint, right? So here the defendant had no way of knowing or any reason to know of the plaintiff's expectation to be compensated for the paint job. Therefore, this third element cannot be satisfied. And we call this, there's a term for it, officious intermeddlers or officious intermeddlers. These are people who just go around and try to perform services, and then get paid for them without ever getting permission or offer and acceptance, without getting basically mutual assent, right? They just run around and try to do things and then get paid, right? Officious intermeddlers. That's not going to work because they're not going to satisfy this third element, because we're saying that's not unjust enrichment. We're basically saying, hey, that was a gift. You just did that out of the kindness of your heart. Sorry. Even though you think that you may be expected to get paid, number one, was it reasonable under the situation? Depending, is very fact specific. But where it definitely fails is this third element. It's not unjust enrichment, because there the defendant's not going to know or have any reason to know of this plaintiff's expectation of being compensated, right? So the other big one we want to talk about is emergency situations under Cotnam v. Wisdom, right? And also under 3A, remember, we talked about this briefly before we jump on to 3B. We also talked about the Necessaries doctrine. So if you remember back to our discussion of incapacity when we were talking about defenses to contract formation, remember we said that if one side provides necessaries, things like food, shelter, clothing, health care, think of the benefits, right? But necessaries to a party who lacks capacity, someone who's a minor under the age of 18, who's intoxicated, or who has mental illness, right? If they're providing necessaries, well, we said, well, that's not going to be a traditional enforceable contract, because you can't enter into a contract per se with someone who lacks capacity, right? It's voidable at the party who lacks capacity's discretion, right? So if you tried to sue them to recover damages, they can just rescind the contract. It's voidable, right? So say you enter into a contract with a 17-year-old kid to provide necessaries, right? Well, if you provide the necessaries and that kid, that 17-year-old kid, never pays you, you can't recover under a traditional enforceable contract theory, because that 17-year-old kid can void the contract, right? But remember, we said there was this idea of restitution in a quasi-contract theory. And the reason that you can recover there under the necessaries doctrine is because these three elements are going to be met, right? The plaintiff here, the adult, is conferring a measurable benefit, the necessaries. The plaintiff is conferring, the adult is conferring the benefit with the reasonable expectation of being paid, right? And he's telling the kid, hey, look, I'm giving you these necessaries, but I want to get $20, $30 a week for them in return. And the kid says, yeah, sure, sounds great, right? So the second element would be met, and the third element would be met because the kid would know or have reason to know of the plaintiff's expectation of being paid, because the plaintiff, the adult, is blatantly telling the minor, hey, look, I'm expecting to be paid. So here, right, under the necessaries doctrine, that's why if we flesh through the elements, right, it's satisfied. So under the necessaries doctrine, we said if you're providing necessaries, right, food, shelter, clothing to a party who lacks capacity to contract, under a quasi-contract theory, restitutionary recovery may be available. And remember, it won't be under restitutionary recovery whatever the agreed upon price is for the necessaries. It's going to be the fair market value, because under a quasi-contract theory, we're not saying that a traditional contract existed. We're just allowing restitutionary recovery, right, under this implied in law contract. Okay, so that's quasi-contract from 1, 2, 3, and 3A. The only other case kind of we need to talk about, and the other way you can see quasi-contract tested, is an emergency situation. Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.